Hello and welcome to the Storytelling for the Soul podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Kanata, and this is the place we talk about all things expressive writing and other creative techniques, all with a little bit of Buffy the Vampire Slayer thrown in. Buckle up and enjoy. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Storytelling for the Soul podcast. My name is Sarah Kanata and I am your host. This episode is coming nice and fresh because I would like to talk about something that I experienced on the weekend that shook me up, but on the flip side, and after doing some journaling and basically revisiting the scenario a few times, I've done a lot of processing over what happened and really what triggered me. And that is the great thing about the type of writing that I teach, which is not standard journaling. It is journaling with a twist. So what does that mean? It means that we're not journaling or writing and it's a massive out-of-body experience and brain dump. We are very consciously, as we write, feeling in to the physical body, the physical sensations taking place from the neck down, not only what is happening in the mind. Because if you are anything like me and you've done any amount of personal development work, you will understand that quite often the mind takes over. And here's the thing, whenever we are talking about trauma, so in terms of trauma, it's obviously very subjective, but what I'm really referring to is any incomplete autonomic nervous system response that essentially gets stuck in the body because in the moment where the trauma happens, we don't allow ourselves to feel and release. And this is part of being human. So if you're anything like me and you're a dog lover, you will notice that dogs and other animals, for that matter, basically they don't have the same brain as we do. And look, I'm not going to attempt to go into the science on this because there are so many people out there far better equipped to be informing you and talking about this than me. But essentially, all the stuff that makes us human and the racing mind is also essentially what leads to trauma being stored in the body. Because an animal, so for example, my favorite dog in the world, which is my brother's little truffle hunting dog, her name is Bibi. She is gorgeous. I love her to bits. But having observed her over the last 10 years or so, it's very clear that she is present. And this is the thing about animals. And I read this on social media and I thought it was so true. So dogs, for example, clearly don't live as long as humans, but they really, really live because they have a sense of presence that humans just don't seem to have. For example, when I'm with Bibi and I'm giving her a piece of cheese, she's in that moment enjoying, loving that piece of cheese. She's not eating that piece of cheese while also thinking about her enormous to-do list. Animals don't function that way. Anyhow, back to this scenario that happened on the weekend. Now, I'm going to try to do my best to basically eliminate any kind of identifying information because that's not the point of this episode. But I do want to illustrate what happens when you do enough of the kind of personal development work that I'm talking about. So expressive writing, mindfulness, well-being, meditation, whatever floats your boat. I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all prescription for everyone. But once you do this work, you have a knowing of who you are. And the consequences of doing this work is that you're able to actually stand firm in who you are and speak in the moment. Now, basically over the weekend, I organized a session for myself with a particular provider. Now, I want to be really honest. There were several red flags that I simply chose to ignore, where in my head I had little light bulbs going off that something wasn't quite right. So, first takeaway here is always trust your gut and your intuition. Sometimes the front cover is exactly how things are, and there's no need for us to overlook that very innate sense that we get from situations. Anyhow, I went along to this session, and I want to say within the first 5 to 10 minutes, I started becoming very uncomfortable. So what that means for me is in my physical body, I started noticing that I was sweating. I knew that my body was talking to me and that something wasn't right, not only because of the physical sensations, but what this particular person was trying to put forward. Now, in this moment, unfortunately for me, so when I first walked into this particular room, I didn't realize, but the door was broken. So I went to close it completely, and that meant that basically I locked us both in. So I was very aware that 5-10 minutes into this session, simply stopping and walking out wasn't an option. So I had to let things run. I didn't feel particularly safe. Now, I think a lot of that is just the result of being a woman and a female and constantly being on alert when things just don't seem quite right. If I was a male who felt comfortable in my ability to protect myself or fight back, I probably, very likely, would have reacted differently. However, I allowed this session to play out. I let things roll. I put the money for the session on the table, and I asked the person to ring someone to let us out. 5, 10, 15 minutes goes by. No one comes. We can't get anyone's attention to open this door. And I exceedingly start basically freaking out. And everything all over my body is just chills. Everything about this situation feels wrong. Now, eventually, thankfully, someone does come along and basically opens the door. So, in this moment, former Sarah, look, maybe even smarter Sarah, because I'm not 100% sure it was all that smart to do this, but I had the reaction in my body. It was almost like I had no option but to speak my truth in that moment. I could have simply walked out, taken the fact that I'd lost some money. It was a small amount of money. It wasn't hundreds of dollars or anything. But I could have just accepted in that moment, walked out, beaten myself up, told myself that, let's face it, Sarah, you ignored some pretty glaring red flags. I could have done that, but I didn't. In that moment, I turned to this person and I said, this is all a hoax. I said, you shouldn't do this to people. And look, I'm eliminating some details here because I don't really want to go into specifics, but essentially what they were trying to do is to use a low value service to basically upcharge for something that was so ridiculous. It's not funny. I don't know who could possibly agree to this, but in any case, it must work on some people because why would you bother doing it otherwise? Anyhow, I said to this person very clearly, very confidently, and to be honest with you, this doesn't necessarily feel comfortable to even relay back, but it happened and I'm proud of myself because like I said, I'm the kind of person who avoids conflict at all costs. But anyhow, I turned to this person. I said, this is all a hoax. You shouldn't do this to people. It's not fair. I want my money back. Now, they were clearly unimpressed with me and not happy. However, I got my cash back and I left. And as soon as I got back out onto the street, and look, I'm in Melbourne, so it's really cold at the moment, but the fresh air hit my face and there was an air of being proud of myself for standing up in that moment. Now, things could have gone really bad for me. I'm very well aware of that. But there was a part of me that was happy that I just didn't go along and let it go. And that's the thing, let it go. How many times do we let things go? And essentially, in letting things go, all we're doing is betraying ourselves. And I've been thinking about this quite a bit because I've been contemplating, well, how do we know if something is merely uncomfortable or if we are going against our values, ethics, and morals, and essentially the core of who we are? And obviously there's a lot of uncomfortable feelings involved there, but I keep on coming back to this point, which I heard Carolyn Myss talking about on the Oprah show. So if you haven't heard of her, she's quite a renowned and famous medical intuitive. I really enjoy some of her work. But Oprah posed a question. It was along the lines of, well, how do you know, I guess, if you're not following the right path for you? And Carolyn Myss says, well, it doesn't feel like self-betrayal. Those words have never left me. It doesn't feel like self-betrayal. And this is the thing. So I came back from this experience and I was really shaken. I don't really feel it was the stupidity of the session and the inauthenticity that really got to me. I think I was just a bit freaked out, to be honest with you, that I was locked in the room with this person with no easy way to escape. And look, if worse came to worse, I could have actually just smashed a window and gotten out. But I mean, that is taking things to another level that thankfully they didn't have to go to. But I did find myself quite shaken up. I'm fairly sure that it was because I was triggered by the feelings of not being safe. And over the last, I want to say 6-7 years, I've done a lot of work and I know what it feels like to be safe in my body. And in that moment, I did not feel safe. Now, if you can't resonate with the word safe, think about support, comfort, in embodied processing language. So I'm an embodied processing practitioner certified through the Centre for Healing here in Australia. So it's basically a body-based approach to working with trauma. So in embodied processing language, we would call this a resource, or put simply, the opposite of overwhelm. I know what that feels like in my body after so many years of practice. And in that moment, I didn't feel safe. And that really triggered me. And I came to that conclusion after quite a lot of journaling. I'm very thankful that I had someone close to me who I could confide in and share the experience with. And look, they thought it was pretty insane and disgusting and out of this world too. But then really where I came to the conclusion of how this event impacted me was through writing. So I wrote about this situation and what was going on 3 or 4 times. Each time my entry was slightly different because each time I was essentially processing what had happened. I was recollecting different things, different thoughts, different feelings. And writing in this way just really helped me to better understand where I was coming from. And also it got me to this place of being proud that I stood in my space. And this is the thing, as a female who's 37, so much of my life has been about shrinking myself, being invisible, avoiding conflict, being too scared to speak my mind, I could keep on going. And in that moment, when I turned to this person and I gave them a piece of my mind in a very rational and measured way, I'm sure that I could potentially have been misconstrued as angry, which I was angry, but I wasn't overly aggressive. I spoke my mind, and I felt like I didn't let this person get away with something that just, there's no other way to say it. I don't really like using the words right and wrong, but it was very wrong because it was very clearly nonsense. So I'm going to leave this episode here. I did want to pop on and be really vulnerable and let you know that as this work unfolds, you unearth different layers to using the tools that self-development arms you with. And this past weekend, I was so glad that I had the ability to basically stare down a blank page and to face a situation that, to be honest with you, was pretty terrible. In hindsight, it still feels terrible, but it's different because I have some understanding of what exactly has triggered me. And also I've taken some pros out of the situation as well. So I'm going to leave it there. You can check out my work, sarahkanata.com. You are always free to email me, info@sarahkanata.com. I will see you and speak with you in the next episode.